Welcome to Just Curious. Today I'm joined by Juan Alfageme, an AI strategist at Deloitte who's helping enterprises bridge the gap between AI hype and execution. With a background in industrial engineering and experience in data pipelines, AI strategy, and enterprise consulting, Juan blends technical expertise with business acumen. He's developed and deployed AI strategies for major banks, energy companies, and global enterprises. Today we'll talk about what it takes to build a strategic AI roadmap, how to identify high impact use cases, and why successful AI adoption is as much about change management as it is about the technology. Juan, welcome to Just Curious.
Thank you for inviting me to this interview.
Yeah, of course. Can you tell us a little bit more about your focus on AI within Deloitte?
Yeah. In Deloitte, as an AI strategy consultant, we focus on bridging the gap between technology and impact. So we try to focus on how a strategy will help maximize AI impact return and the ROI in such a big ecosystem as AI is right now.
What's the first thing you do when a company asks, where should we start with AI?
Okay, so firstly, we gotta see where our client is at. Sometimes our client wants to start building Gen AI use cases, but they still don't have even a data governance team that can help them extract, analyze, and maximize their data. So it's the main part, the first part, to see their AI maturity. We usually do a AI maturity assessment to be able to identify where we at and the gap we need to bridge.
What does that assessment look like? What inputs do you take into account when you're helping someone understand if they're ready or not?
Okay, we usually take the data part, see how our client is connecting their data, how are they extracting it, where are they loading it, and how are they using it. And secondly, we take a look at their technology stack, see their technology maturity, see if they have the technology stack to be able to implement big Gen AI use cases, or they still have like a big gap and we need to work on this technology architecture before moving on. And also in the management change to see how their employees are within AI, how much do they know about it, AI, and what kind of workshops or how can we try to make this change management plan for them to maximize the use cases we will implement in the future.
When it comes to data, for someone who's listening to this and wondering whether their data is ready for an AI strategy, what are the considerations that come into play when evaluating whether data is clean and organized and ready to be
Okay.
ingested by
So
a potential solution?
mainly right now, the main pipeline, it's called ELT. It can also be ETL. It stands for extract, load, and transform. Okay. So you got to be able to extract the data from whatever your activity is. If you're a bank, you need to be able to extract all the payments your clients make each day. And after extracting all the data in real time, you got to be able to load it into your databases to be able to have it correctly structured over there. And then you need to, or it's easier if you are able to transform the data that it's already loaded in your database. So it's easier for AI to work on that. We've just seen the MCP protocol that OpenAI just adopt from cloud. And that's a big example on how data and structuring data will accelerate AI adoption and how AI will maximize its impact through data.
How much does that change how much work needs to be done with regards to structuring your data?
Exactly. Well, the MCP protocol, for example, it's a really good example because it shows you how just by having a type of guidelines on how to extract or use a specific type of data will help the whole enterprise to know, okay, this our data for our client part, it's built this way. It's a structure in a protocol way following these guidelines. So every time we deploy a use case and we need to call external data for what could be on RAG or something similar, where you need external context for an answer, you know how to call, how to communicate with this database, and it's much easier because you don't need to do a, a specific use case communication with our databases for each different use case.
Many leaders believe AI can solve everything, but it's rarely true. How do you help companies separate real opportunities from pipe dreams?
Yeah, that's mainly one of our biggest challenge right now because a lot of people don't know what AI is or what Gen AI is because you start seeing in social media and you think Gen AI can do everything, but it's really hard to know exactly what they can do. That's where our expertise brings on. We usually, for identifying use cases, we can usually do workshops with the employees to see what their other needs are in their specific job, and then with our expertise we'll try to convert from their necessities to an AI use case impact. So we are the ones that by our expertise are separating these hallucinations and these desires AI with real use cases.
Yeah. You've talked about a prioritization matrix. Can you walk us through that process and what goes into evaluating value and feasibility?
Exactly. That will be the second step of identifying use cases, which is one of the main parts of our strategic offering. So after these workshops I've mentioned, we have usually a long list of use cases, and we need to see what the real impact is of each use case. So what we usually do is we try to build parameterization matrix, which has, as you said, two axes. It has impact in and value in the business and feasibility. So for impact in the business, we usually take a look at what's the initial investment that needs to be made to deploy this use case. What's the cost of scaling this use case in the future? What's the efficiency that this use case will bring, and um how will this make an impact on the OpEx in our business? And then we will take a look at new incomes that this use case may bring, new clients, new business lines, whatever. And then we'll take a look at non-tangible incomes, like being more, having a better look as a company because you're more eco-friendly, for example. Okay, how can that impact? And this matrix has weights which are parameterized with our clients. So if our client's strategic plan is focusing in reducing cost or being more eco-friendly, we will have these criteria have a bigger weight on our matrix so that our prioritized use cases are the ones that will feed with their strategic plans. So same thing goes with feasibility. We take a look at the data needed for the use case and the gap we need to close between what the company has with their data right now and what they need of data for this use case, their technology stack, the implementation cost. So we take a look at how much it's going to cost in effort and therefore time and money to deploy this use case. Not all AI use cases are the same. There are simple use cases, there are big use cases, and there are really complex use cases. So we take a look at the effort we need to, well, the company needs is gonna need to do in order to deploy this use case. And we take a look at all the regulations, okay, as part of feasibility. It's not the same if you're in a specific area with a lot of regulations followed by different a acts that are going on in the different regions. It's not the same US than it's in Europe, than it's in China, for example. So we take a look at like our this use case, it's gonna have this impact in the business, but is it really worth it? How much is it worth it? So that's where we leverage the feasibility to try and weigh things up and see if it makes sense or not, or like which ones are the best fitted for now.
Yeah.
And that's how we prioritize this matrix, because maybe you have a really good use case which it just isn't for now. Maybe the gap you need to breach for you to deploy that use case is really big and will will make a really big economic effort for the company to deploy that use case. But maybe in a 6 month on when your technology stack it's more mature, it's a really interesting use case because that use case in the impact fund in the impact criteria was a use case that we saw it has a really big ROI, really easy payback, or really good net value. So that's the way we prioritize, and we are able to not leave them behind, not forget those use cases, but still have them in our watch list. So if in the future, the technology stack, the data, it probably gets more mature in our client, so we're gonna be able to remake the framework and be able to see if it's fitted for deploying in the future.
Yeah. You mentioned this is the second step in a process. I'd love to walk through the entire process and maybe use an example. You recently helped a Spanish bank define its AI strategy. Can you walk us through how you structured that engagement from identification of use case through the development of MVPs or POCs?
Yeah. Okay. First, strategy and use cases, what we're talking about right now, it's a big pillar out of the whole like AI governance we can call, which has also this technology stack and see how the maturity assessment of all the technology parts has some change management plan we've talked about before and has other pillars that we can talk about after. But focusing on AI strategy and use cases, what we usually do is it depends on the scope of the project, but we can either go with an initial long list of use cases if the client is willing to just prioritize our knowledge, our use cases knowledge, or we can have workshops. So we can go with some stakeholders from for the company and okay, what are your main problems in your day to day? What are your necessities? And out of all these conversations, we're able to build this long list of use cases we've talked about before. So this first step can either be from scratch and trying to convert what the employees need to use case, or can either be just start with our knowledge and give 100 use case long list to work with. Okay, that depends on the scope of the project. Obviously, if you need to sit down with a lot of different areas and different stakeholders, it's going to be longer, it's going to take more time, and obviously it's going to be
And so who
more expensive.
if you are doing that, the version where you're engaging stakeholders in conversations about their
Mhm.
problems and needs, who's typically involved and how many people are involved?
It really depends because we've had projects which are just for a specific part of a company. For example, I don't know, I've worked recently with the risk team of a big national bank. So in that case, we were focusing on just what the risk analyst um, workflow was and trying to get use case out of this workflow for them to make their lives easier and make them more efficient. But we've also done at a highest level. So it obviously depends what the scope of the project is. Because if you want to make use cases that later on are going to be able for the whole company, then you're not going to go area by area with all the small tiny areas because that will take forever. But you then will go for like with the main 5 areas of the company. For example, would be I don't know, operations, um, risk. It will be well, it depends of the type of client, but how deep we dive depends on the scope of the project. But it's mainly the same objective, which is try to bring up their necessities and being able to transform those necessities to the long list of use cases.
Yeah. And so with
And
that
what?
bank, you
Yeah,
ran a process to engage them in conversation. You identified a bunch of use
we
cases.
identify more than 250 use cases, and out of those 250 use cases, which were kind of aligned with with their strategic plan, for the next 3 years. They built a strategic roadmap, and we were aligning our AI use cases with their strategic objectives. So we then went on to prioritize creating that matrix we talked about before, and we parameterize that matrix with them. Okay, to try to align the metric as much as possible with what they were looking for. They were looking for cost efficiency, so we try to parameterize the metrics for each it to be focused on cost efficiency, right? And out of that prioritization, we brought a ranking with those 250 use cases, and then we were able to see, okay, let's start by doing X number of use cases that are going to be deployed in the next 6 months. Okay, in our case, it was 4 use cases. So we made a business case for the top 10 use cases to be able what we should expect and which one should we consider to be these 4 MVPs that we wanted to deploy in the short term. And by doing this business case, we were able to identify what our net value was going to be, what our return on investment was going to be, and what our payback was going to be. So obviously, having in hand what our client had as effort available and money available, we were able to take the 4 use cases that will make the biggest impact, but were under the scope of the project. And after having that business case, we were able to design what the use case will be. So we had the scope of each use case. We had the stakeholders impact. We had the data that was impact. We had the different technology stack we needed to use for that use case. And we built the pipeline and the workflow of that use case to be able to bring it down the use case as we define it in the initial step.
And that third step, I guess, is a development of a POC
Yeah.
or an MVP. How long does that usually take to go from having down selected to 4 use cases in this case to having something in market to begin to show the value of that investment?
Yeah. Okay. Well, um, it's really depends because we can have small AI use cases that will take maybe uh 300 hours to deploy as an MVP and start testing it, and then maybe 500 hours to scale the solution and be able to have it in production. But we can also have a thousand hours use case just for building the MVP, and then 2,000 for scaling the solution. It's true, scaling the solution, it's a really big thing right now, and it's really a thing that it's really impacting businesses because of the high cost of tokens and the high cost of GPUs running. So it's really sensitive to really be able to know what the scope of the project is going to be and how many people, how many employees or clients, depends on the use case, are we really going to be impacting and are going to be using the solution. Because it's not the same to have a use case that just the risk area of our client is using, which is maybe, I don't know, 200 analysts, than a virtual assistant that is helping its client every time they have any problem with the app. Because
Yes.
maybe we're going to millions of users interacting with the use case. So that means bigger infrastructure cost and token tokens cost with interaction with the LLM.
Yeah. Is there any benefit to having a portfolio of some faster projects and some longer term projects, in that those faster projects will begin to show a bit of a return earlier on that maybe enables momentum with the strategy? Does it matter at all?
Yeah, definitely. What we've seen so long is that our clients, I mean, well, in general, everyone is really skeptic with AI because it's a really expensive world and expensive ecosystem. So people aren't just diving into the biggest ROI use case. they first want to try out and in a small sandbox, in a small pilot, and an easy use case to see if it really brings value rather than starting with the biggest game changers. Because usually the biggest game changers are also the one with the biggest upfront cost to deploy the use case, and some companies aren't willing to start with those use cases because they find it really, because people don't know much about Gen AI and AI, so that makes everyone really skeptical.
Yeah. With regards to the token cost, does that inform the choice of models and also building in some flexibility with respect to the model that's used to take advantage of new models that are more efficiently
Yeah.
delivering results?
Yes, it's a big impact. That's the thing we usually focus on. It's the main focus on our business case. So when we make a business case for the use cases, what we take a look is at those type of costs. Okay, we take a look at the capex and the opex, and mainly the opex. We want to see what type of use case are we building. Is it an virtual assistant where our user is going to be interacting with the client? Because in that case there's a lot of monetization of the input token and output token, and that input token and output token really varies from GPT-4o with DeepSeek, which is open source, for example. So it's a really important thing. If when we scale the solution, we can also try to look for strategies in our AI app which will consider or evaluate the question, and depending on the complexity of the question, we will call it one LLM or other LLM in order to save money. Okay, if our AI app is being asked what's 2 plus 2, we don't need to call GPT 4o because any small model can do that sum for you. So we can offer a strategy to okay, let's have this money just for complex situations or for complex answers, and that's a thing that really needs to be a focus, and we really take care of it. It also depends if, for example, it's another type of use case which holds a lot of documents and needs to take a look at a lot of documents, maybe because it's an RAG. Because in that case, we need to take a look. Okay, how long are the documents? It's not the same for a model that needs to extract it needs to extract text from data from, for example, PDFs. If it's a 10-page PDF or if it's a 100-page PDF. So we also take a look at what the monetization of extracting the data is, which is different from the tokens with a virtual assistant. Okay, so those are all things that we consider in order to make a business case that makes sense and that really bring you up front where your costs are going to be, so that it's not that you start scaling the solution then find out the costs are going to the sky and you're not able to handle the solution and then not able to bring an impact because you're running out of money.
Yeah. And with that Spanish bank, where did you end up? You had 4 use cases that you prioritized, you launched 4
Yeah.
MVPs. What ultimately did the bank get out of this engagement?
Well, in parallel to these use cases, we define an AI architecture, and we also define a model with the controls needed according to regulation. In our case, in Europe, is the AI Act, AU AI Act. And well, those 3 lines, apart from the change management plan we talked about and the operative model we redefined, but the main tangible things were these 4 use cases, which now we're scaling, and the AI architecture, which we are implementing too. So right now we're working parallel in these 2 work streams. First one, we're scaling the 4 use cases. Apart from, we're going to start developing another 3 use cases as MVPs, but we're scaling those 4, and then we're building an agnostic AI architecture to be able to accelerate the new use cases, be able to host our scalable use cases in the AI architecture and accelerate all the new development of use cases so that it's easier for them to, as we've talked before, to bring impact out of a use case as fast as possible.
Yeah. And what does that AI architecture look like? Maybe not specifically given this is a client, but in general, what are the components of a
Well, that's
successful AI architecture?
it's actually a big thing that right now maybe not all clients are considering because a lot of clients are building the architecture just for the use case. So if you have a use case where you need some more monitorization or some evaluation or maybe some prompt gesture, you'll just build it for the use case,
Uh-huh.
but you're not really building agnostic architectures which are really gonna accelerate new use cases. Okay, so architecture, and I think what architecture should look like is um built in microservices, and it's really important, or I see it's really important to be agnostic to any technology. Right now AI is a really newly ecosystem, and it's changing every time to time. You don't want to be locked in with a vendor and then finding out that after a year it's not the best solution anymore and you've built your whole architecture based on a specific solution, and it's harder for you to go back and deploy another different solution. So I think it's really important to have an agnostic AI solution, AI architecture solution, which has the different components, different microservices, the orchestrator, the evaluator, the WAD rails. And then on those different microservices, they are probably in different instances or in a Docker file where they can be treated separately and they can be developed and scaled separately. Then you can see what the best option is right now in the market. But knowing that you're building it as different microservices for you to be able to scale it, change it, and make any adjustment to each different component as a separate part, as a one. So you're not gonna impact the whole ecosystem, the whole architecture, and it's gonna be easier for you to adapt to the new trends.
Yeah. And are you in Deloitte advising clients on the build versus buy or rent decision when it comes to
We
a solution? Because I would imagine that kind of taps into that perspective that you want to maintain flexibility. And so I'm curious how you think about that kind of build versus buy, where buy is going to be cheaper, but your flexibility maybe is limited with respect to
Yeah.
where it goes and
Well,
what you do with your data.
yeah, it's definitely we something we advise. When we take a look, I mean, we know all those financial asset aspects of Gen AI. We take a look at all of them. So obviously, we know the impact that a build versus buy has in money. But it's true, it depends. It's really hard right now for a company to build their own because we see how big those LLMs are and how hard it is, and how every single month a new update from a different competitor comes on and it's better than the last one. So I think it's a difficult conversation, but it's something we can help our client if they're willing to make a decision between buying or building. We will definitely guide them and advise them on the pros and cons of these solutions.
Yeah. As we come to a close, I'd love to ask you some questions about things that you've learned and working across multiple industries and helping them effectively navigate, what is a changing world. Maybe we can start with mistakes. What are the top one or two mistakes companies make when trying to scale AI? Maybe one is not having an agnostic AI architecture, but yeah, what are the biggest mistakes?
Okay, yeah, we could talk about like technical errors, as you've said, not being agnostic and not having the focus. But I will say something we've mentioned about before about how these big use cases or the ones with the biggest upfront costs were the one that people were building. Clients are really skeptic about AI. They're not having a midterm, long-term vision on where they need to put the money on. So they'd rather have a small use case that we just make them invest a small amount of money rather than having this holistic vision on how it's going to impact the whole company and how this investment is going to be a big return on investment and a payback of maybe 3 years, but what will mean in the midterm and in the long term. So I think the fact that people don't really know, as we talked at the start, they don't really know how to separate reality versus a dream of what AI is. So that makes difficult for companies to know where to invest the money and how and really take like big investments on AI because they are skeptic. They people when people don't know about something, they're skeptic. They don't want to put their money on it because they don't know how it's gonna turn out.
Yeah. Yeah. So you're saying like the longer term benefit is going to result from having a kind of cohesive medium term, long term strategy versus just rushing into smaller pilots that
Exactly.
are easy to get off the ground, but maybe don't like aggregate into something really meaningful.
Exactly. So if you, for example, you build a small pilot or a small use case that just helps a specific type of analyst in your risk area of your company. I mean, that will definitely help the analyst that is using it. But what percentage of your company is being impacted by that use case? 0.1%, maybe. I mean, that's not gonna be a game changer. That's not gonna be that differentiation strategy from a competitor. Okay, so if you want to go with the differentiation strategy, you gotta really invest and know what to invest. That's where Deloitte and strategy consulting, AI strategy, because it's not about building. Everyone can build
Yeah.
a model, okay, or an AI app. It's easy, but it's knowing where to locate your money for you to make a differentiation strategy from your competitors and being able to, in the midterm or long term, gain market size because of that differentiation strategy, have a different offer than your competitors.
Yeah. Awesome. Juan, that's a great place to end. I really appreciate you coming by, just curious and sharing your perspectives and learnings with us.
Thank you so much, Stuart. It's really nice to have you here and being part of Just Curious. I think we can make really high impact projects together.